Mafia series is best known for the thrilling mob stories that play out within fictional American cities, all held within a unique time and place. Each game has its own protagonist. They have their own backgrounds, motivations and playstyle. Here's our personal ranking of the Mafia protagonists so far. Number 3, Lincoln Clay. Although Lincoln is third on our list, he's still a great character and by far the most different out of the three. This is enhanced by the setting and timeline in which the game takes place, especially with a dark, tragic backstory that helps form who he is throughout the year 1968. So Lincoln Clay was born in 1945, abandoned in 1947 by his mother. Eventually he found himself in an orphanage in the French ward within New Bordeaux. When that orphanage inevitably closed, he was taken in by Sammy Robinson, his second family. However, Lincoln still chased his identity and did so by joining the US Army and fighting in the Vietnam War, where he became extremely proficient with a range of military weapons, an expert in stealth and a force of nature in combat. Here he learned the art of psychological warfare during his time with the CIA, and upon returning to New Bordeaux in 1968, Lincoln is welcomed by his second family and father Sammy Robinson, the only place he's ever belonged. Although when he arrives, Lincoln soon is made aware of Sammy's troubles. He owes Sal Marcano, the mob boss who owns the city. Lincoln offers to use his skills to help Sammy out of debt, forming a connection with Sal's son, Georgie Marcano. Lincoln is offered the opportunity to take over Sammy's position, which he refuses. Sal Marcano being a treacherous little shit, he betrays the black mob and wipes out Lincoln's second family, with Lincoln just about surviving. This is a pivotal moment in Lincoln's story and leads him on a revenge against Sal Marcano. Although he could just kill Sal at any time, he chooses to take away everything first: his family, power, money and dreams of a casino. With his prior time in the military, fueled with rage and a lot of pain, created the Lincoln Clay we see in 1968, making him the most unique character out of the three in terms of playstyle. His combat is brutal as he overpowers anyone in his way, he can stealth through entire groups, can use any weapon and is able to form valuable connections that he can use to his benefit that make things easier for him in combat. Hell, he'll even be deemed OP. He has a lot going on. Now, although the game gives a huge amount of context to who Lincoln Clay is, from a young age, he has been in survival mode for the entirety of his life, with no chance to pause, reflect and let his emotions out. He suffers from PTSD from his time at war, and we get some dream sequences to highlight his trauma and the pain he suffered throughout his life. You do feel for the character and the path he is on. We see glimpses of Lincoln being social and part of a group at the beginning of Mafia 3. The night of blood in Sammy's bar, the betrayal completely pushes Lincoln over the edge towards being numb to any feeling and he struggles to connect. He's merely using people for his ultimate goal, and this ends up being his biggest strength in terms of his revenge mission against Sal Marcano. But as a player, you want to see him connect a little more, but understandably he has tunnel vision towards dismantling Sal Marcano's criminal network one by one, and it leads to him being the most badass protagonist. He is terrifying. He has the benefit of having the most screen time, with Mafia 3 being the longest game, so he does have some major highlights. But aside from DLCs, in particular Faster Baby, which expanded on his character, his walls never come down and it leads to him being one note throughout the game. He doesn't have much humour outside of the occasional interaction with John Donovan, and he sort of lacks the charm you come to expect from a Mafia protagonist. He's a great character and it's a tragic story in many ways, seeing this guy who can just never catch a break. He's ultimately defined by his rage and need for revenge. I freely admit Mafia 3 being the worst game out of the three, and is so different from Mafia 1 and 2, it hampers his ranking, especially since Lincoln's story is consistently derailed by the game's structure. But you do go on a real journey with Lincoln during his Punisher-esque story. Number 2, Vito Scaletta. So Vito comes in at second place for us as the main protagonist of Mafia 2, a very solid competitor for top place who epitomises the gangster of the late 40s and 50s. So born in Sicily in 1925, Vito's early life was marked by hardship and poverty. He was born in San Martino, Sicily, into a very poor family. At the age of 7, his father decided to move the family to America to start a new life. Sadly, even in Empire Bay, they couldn't escape poverty. He watched his father work himself into an early grave and soon decided that life inside the law wasn't for him. Growing up on the streets, Vito crossed paths with Joe Barbaro, a loudmouth bully who eventually became his best friend. Vito and Joe were the masterminds behind 100 petty crimes, all the while watching the neighbourhood's wealthy gangsters and dreaming of the good life. This is where Vito's fire to really make something of himself started. However, after being arrested in 1943, this is halted and Vito is now given the choice of going to jail or joining the US Army. He chooses the army and is now at war back in Italy. Vito is mostly desensitised to the violence from his time in World War II, and the way he fights in-game reflects that. After being wounded in battle, however, Vito spends time in an army hospital and is later given a 1-month leave to return home. While there, Joe arranges a set of forged discharge papers so Vito doesn't have to return to the army. This pairing back up with Joe is what introduces Vito to the Clemente crime family and ultimately changes the course of his life forever. What's unique to Vito Scaletta's character gameplay wise is his hand-to-hand combat in Mafia 2, which emphasises a raw and gritty approach that reflects his tough upbringing and the brutal environment of Empire Bay. Players can engage in melee fights that feature a mix of punches, grapples and counterattacks, allowing for a dynamic combat experience. The combat system rewards timing and positioning, enabling Vito to perform powerful finishing moves against his opponents. As the player, you never question where Vito gained his ability, as his time in the war justifies this style of fighting. This also goes for gunplay, as the player you never question melting enemies' heads with one bullet, as Vito is military trained, similar to Lincoln. The hand-to-hand boxing style combat is a real highlight in Mafia 2 and is a great unique quality to the game and character. Now, one of Vito's primary flaws is his susceptibility to the allure of power and respect within the criminal world, which often leads him to make reckless decisions that endanger both himself and those he cares about. His desire to prove himself can cloud his judgment, pushing him into dangerous situations and alliances that ultimately have dire consequences. Additionally, Vito struggles with feelings of guilt and loyalty, particularly when faced with moral dilemmas involving friends and family. This inner conflict often leaves him torn between his ambitions and his conscience, highlighting his vulnerability and the human cost of his choices in the unforgiving landscape of organised crime. However, these relationships with his family are for me the highlight of Vito's story, as the player also feels guilt when you speak to Vito's mother or sister, who only want the best for him, yet seem disappointed in the life he has chosen. In contrast, you feel excitement every time Joe and Vito share the screen, as I don't think there has ever been a better duo in gaming. The two bounce off each other to create really entertaining sequences in Mafia 2, and this is also the only reason we put Vito at number 2 instead of first place, as without Joe, Vito is not as strong on his own. This can be seen in Mafia 3, where Vito is not as interesting on screen when he's not got Joe to bounce off and to bring out another side to him. Vito is a guy who just always wanted to make something of himself after watching his father suffer a quiet yet grueling working existence, and is portrayed brilliantly in the Mafia series. You always feel behind him no matter what decision he makes, and you feel his hurt in relationships when he does too. His advantage is he is also the only protagonist to make an appearance in all Mafia game series entries, whether that be 8 pixels or 4K, and is truly an icon of Mafia. Number 1. Tommy Angelo. Taking our first place prize is Tommy Angelo, the original Mafia character and the one who deserves our top place for many reasons. So Tommy was born in San Celeste, Sicily on April 5th, 1900, the third and youngest child of Marco Angelo Sr., a plantation supervisor, and Maria Angelo. He had 2 older siblings, Marco Jr. and Isabella, and the Angelos emigrated to the United States in 1904 when Tommy was 4 years old, after the plantation was foreclosed by a moneylender, which sent the Angelos into poverty. After a month at sea, Tommy and his family arrived in Empire Bay that Christmas, eventually settling in Lost Heaven. Tommy found employment with a road crew, living in camps for months at a time, as he helped build highways throughout the northern United States. He eventually tired of the nomadic lifestyle this job called for and moved back to Lost Heaven in 1926, using the money he'd saved to purchase his first taxi, to then work as a cab driver on the streets of Lost Heaven during Prohibition. Oh, how this changed this poor man's path. During one of his night shifts, 2 men later revealed to be Sam Trapani and Paulie Lombardo appear and hold Tommy at gunpoint. They all pile into Tommy's taxi and order Tommy to drive to escape a pursuit from rival mobsters of the Morello crime family, which they are successful, and Tommy is compensated by Don Salieri of the Salieri crime family. Tommy also refuses additional work from Salieri initially, despite the hint of the money he could make, but after returning to his everyday job, on a coffee break he is attacked by Morello's crew the next morning, and ultimately finds himself now working for the Salieri crime family and beginning his life as a mobster. Now this starts Tommy's journey in the mob. With each chapter he is slowly introduced to combat, and as the chapters advance, the sequences get more and more intense to reflect that. You as the player get to see his transition from an everyday man to eventually becoming Salieri's best gunman and an established hitman for the family. Now what the story doesn't do a great job of spotlighting, how Tommy is so effective in combat from the get-go, without a notable background like Vito and Lincoln to help it make sense, so the player is forced to accept that Tommy is just naturally incredible with every weapon he decides to use. Video games, I guess. But what makes Tommy so strong as a character is his story feels authentic and like a true Mafia story. It highlights a guy who is struggling, who gets caught up in the mob by accident, and he gets in too deep before he even realises. During specific moments in the story, he's very conflicted as a person, is more emotional than the other protagonists for better or worse. He makes major mistakes that inevitably impact him down the line, and these choices make him feel more human when you see the character deal with this internal conflict. A major highlight of Tommy's story is the relationships he forms with the people around him. His two best friends, Polly and Sam. You see their brotherhood grow throughout, but also people like Frank Coletti, consigliere for the family, both form a bond out of respect, and their stories sort of end up mirroring each other in a way at the end. The best thing to happen to Tommy is he eventually marries Sarah and at first has a daughter with her. This pushes him towards finally realising that there might be more important things than having fun with his friends in the mob and making money. This combined with Don Salieri's true colours rapidly revealing themselves as the story advances, the contract killings get more intense and outlandish. Don begins lying to his men and becoming a noticeable hypocrite throughout. Getting Tommy to unknowingly transport dope was grounds to leave the mob completely. It helps lead to Tommy's biggest mistake as both he and Polly eventually risk it all for the biggest score of their lifetime and essentially going against Salieri. With his life on the line, he decides the only way out for him and his family is to tell all to Detective Norman. It all combines to make Tommy one of the most interesting characters in the series. He's ultimately a rat, which is dishonourable and should make him unlikable, yet strangely he still has some honour or loyalty to his family at the very least, which makes him slightly redeemable, and I mean a tiny bit. I think if you finish a game and almost everyone has a different opinion on a character, some justify what Tommy did while others disagree with his actions, then he's a good character that creates conversation. All of this makes Tommy relatable though, which is the character's biggest strength and why Mr. Angelo is number 1 on our list. But that is the end of the video. Tell us how you would rank the 3 protagonists we have so far. Is your list the exact same as ours or completely different? It will be interesting to see where this new protagonist in Mafia the Old Country places, but let's hope it's at the top. That's all from me. I will catch you on the next one. Bye bye.
That's life. That's life. That's what all the people say. You're right.